Good morning and welcome to today's story, a touching, humane, and educational tale.
The night they threw her out, Lucy May Carter was still holding the baby bottle. She was 17 years old, barefoot on the back porch, rain tapping the tin roof, when her foster mother dropped a canvas bag at her feet and told her not to come back. This story is about what happens when a girl nobody protected decides to protect herself, and how losing a home can become the first step toward building one. Lucy had lived with the Carters since she was 8, long enough to memorize the groan of the screen door, long enough to know where Mrs. Carter kept the extra flour, where Mr. Carter hung his hat, how many steps creaked on the stairs, and how quiet a child learns to become when she is trying not to be a burden. For years, Lucy had been the useful one. She gathered eggs before sunrise. She peeled potatoes at the sink with cold fingers in winter. She folded laundry still warm from the line. She rocked fussy calves in the barn. She babysat when neighbors asked. She never talked back, never slammed a door, never asked for more than what was given. And for a long time, she believed that if she worked hard enough, stayed grateful enough, stayed small enough, she might one day stop feeling borrowed. Then Mrs. Carter gave birth to a son, Noah Carter, pink-cheeked, healthy, loud, and loved in the open. Everything changed after that. It did not happen all at once. That was the cruel part. It happened in little ways first. Her plate at supper got smaller. Her chores got heavier. Her room became temporary storage for baby things. Then her bed was moved to the laundry room. Then her name started sounding different in Mrs. Carter's mouth. Flatter, colder, like something being used up. Lucy told herself it would pass. She told herself the baby needed attention. She told herself families went through seasons. She told herself not to be selfish. That was the trouble with girls like Lucy. They could explain away their own heartbreak better than anybody. That evening, the rain had started just before sundown. The kitchen smelled like wet denim, canned beans, and baby powder. Noah was crying. Mr. Carter was staring at the table like there might be an answer written in the wood grain. And Mrs. Carter, with one hand on the baby and the other braced against the counter, turned and looked at Lucy like she had already made peace with something ugly. "We can't keep doing this," she said. Lucy blinked. "Doing what?" "This," Mrs. Carter snapped, gesturing at her like she was not a girl, but an expense. "Feeding you, housing you, carrying you along when we've got our own child now." The words hit harder because they were spoken plain. No shouting, no drama, just a clean, cold removal. Lucy looked at Mr. Carter then. He had called her pumpkin once, years ago, had lifted her onto a fence rail so she could watch the horses, had brought her peppermint sticks from town at Christmas. Now he would not even meet her eyes. "Please," Lucy whispered. The word came out smaller than she meant it to. Mrs. Carter set the canvas bag by the door. Inside was one extra dress, a comb with 2 missing teeth, a worn blanket, and the sweater Lucy had outgrown last spring. "That's enough," she said. "You're old enough to figure the rest out." And that was how it ended. Not with a hug, not with an apology, not even with anger. Just a door, a bag, rain, and a girl standing in the dark, realizing the place she had spent 9 years trying to earn had never truly been hers at all. Lucy May Carter walked until the farmhouse lights disappeared. Then she kept walking. The rain followed her down the dirt road in a cold, steady sheet, the kind that soaks through a dress slow at first, and then all at once. By the time she reached the county road, her sweater clung to her arms, her shoes squished with every step, and the canvas bag felt twice as heavy as it had on the porch. She did not cry. Not because she was strong, not because it did not hurt, but because something inside her had gone still. That was the strange thing about being hurt too many times in the same place. After a while, pain stopped looking dramatic. It got quiet. It sat beside you. It walked with you in the dark and kept pace. Lucy headed east without much thought, following the road past split-rail fences, hayfields, and low hills gone black under the storm. A dog barked once from somewhere far off. A porch light flicked on in the distance, then off again. She kept her head down and moved past every house she saw. She did not want to knock. She did not want to stand on another porch and ask if there was room. She did not want to hear another woman hesitate, did not want to see another man glance at the floor before saying no. By midnight, the road gave way to a narrower track that wound toward the woods. She left it anyway. There was no plan in that, only instinct. The farther she got from fences and mailboxes and barns, the easier it was to breathe. The night air smelled of wet leaves, creek mud, and pine. Somewhere in the trees, water moved over rock with a low, steady murmur. Lucy followed the sound because it was the only thing in the dark that felt certain. Before dawn, she found a small overhang above the creek bank and curled there with the blanket around her shoulders. She slept hard, not safely, just hard. When she woke, the rain had stopped, and the woods looked washed clean. Everything dripped. The hemlocks, the laurel, the flat gray stones along the creek. She drank from the water with both hands, shivering as the cold ran through her, her stomach cramped with hunger. She had not eaten since midday yesterday, and all she had in the bag was half a biscuit wrapped in cloth, now soggy from the rain. She ate it in 3 bites and stood there a long minute, staring at the empty rag in her hand as if there ought to have been more. By afternoon, her legs were trembling. She followed the creek uphill, stepping over roots slick with moss, ducking under fallen branches, brushing through mountain laurel thick enough to hide a deer. The woods grew steeper, quieter, wilder. No wagon ruts, no axe marks, no smoke, no sign of anybody. And then she heard it. Not the creek, something larger. A deep rushing sound ahead, steady and full, like wind pushing through 1,000 leaves at once. Lucy stopped and listened. The sound came again, louder now, water falling. She pushed through a stand of rhododendron and stepped out onto a shelf of wet stone. The waterfall was not grand the way folks talked about waterfalls in picture books or railroad posters. It was hidden, narrow, tucked into the mountain like a secret, but it was beautiful in a way that caught her off guard. Water spilled over a limestone ledge in a silver sheet, dropping into a dark pool below and sending cool mist out into the hollow. Late day light filtered through the trees above, touching the falling water with pale gold. Behind the curtain, barely visible, was something darker, a shadow, a recess in the rock. Lucy stared at it. Then she moved closer. The rocks beside the falls were slick, and more than once she nearly slipped. She had to brace one hand against the cliff and edge sideways, feeling for footholds with the toes of her shoes. Cold spray soaked the front of her dress. Her heart hammered so hard she could hear it over the water. Then she stepped through. The shift was immediate. The roar of the falls stayed in her ears, but the worst of the spray fell away behind her. She stood inside a shallow stone alcove, dry under the overhang, hidden from the hollow below by the sheet of water just a few feet in front of her. Lucy did not move for several seconds. The floor was flat enough to sleep on. The ceiling was low but solid. The back wall was cool and dry to the touch. No road could be seen from here. No porch, no front door, no face looking at her like she had overstayed her welcome. Only stone, water, and a space just big enough for one frightened girl to disappear. Lucy set down the canvas bag. Then she sat on the limestone floor and looked out through the veil of falling water at the green world beyond it. For the first time since the door had closed behind her, she felt something other than shock. Not hope, not yet, but a thin, stubborn flicker of thought. Maybe I can stay the night here. Then after a while, maybe one night could become 2. And by the time evening settled into the hollow and the light turned soft behind the water, a larger thought had begun to take shape. If nobody wanted her in their home, maybe she would build one where nobody thought to look. Lucy May stayed the first night behind the waterfall with her blanket pulled tight around her shoulders and her canvas bag tucked beneath her head. She did not sleep much. The stone beneath her was harder than any bed she had ever known. The roar of the water never stopped, and every little sound from the woods beyond the falls seemed bigger in the dark. A branch snapping, leaves shifting, something moving near the pool below. But morning came anyway. Cold, pale light filtered through the sheet of water and cast trembling patterns across the stone floor. The air inside the alcove was damp near the opening, but farther back, where the rock curved inward, it was dry enough to touch with the palm of her hand. Lucy stood slowly, stiff in the legs, sore in the shoulders, hungry in a way that made her feel hollow all the way down to her bones. Then she looked around that small hidden space and made the first real decision of her new life. If she was going to stay even one more day, she could not keep thinking like a girl waiting to be let back in. She had to think like somebody building something. That morning, she started with the ground. She gathered armfuls of dry leaves from beneath thick cedar and pine, then hauled them back up the rocks in 3 trips. She laid them in the driest corner of the alcove and covered them with small hemlock boughs to make a bed softer than bare limestone. It was not much, but it lifted her off the cold floor. That mattered. Next came water. The waterfall itself was too heavy in the center, but near the edge, where the stream thinned, she found she could catch clean water in her tin cup without getting soaked through. She drank until her stomach hurt, then filled the cup again and set it beside her blanket like something precious. Food was harder. She found blackberries gone sour on the vine, a few hickory nuts beneath a tree downhill. Later, after watching birds scratch among the leaves, she found a patch of wild onions growing near the creek and dug up the smallest ones with her knife. It was not enough. Not for long. By the second evening, the weakness had started to shake through her arms whenever she climbed the rocks. Her thoughts moved slower. Her temper got thin. More than once, she had to sit still and wait for the woods to stop tilting. But even then, she kept working. She gathered flat stones and dragged them into the alcove one by one. Not because she knew exactly what she was building, only because she understood cold and she understood wind, and she knew the mist rolling back from the falls would turn mean once the weather changed. So she began making a low barrier near the front of the alcove. Stone over stone. Not pretty, not even, just enough to break the draft. As she worked, bits of her old life came back in strange pieces. The way Mrs. Carter used to send her to stack feed sacks tight against the barn wall before a storm. The way Mr. Carter once showed her how to brace loose boards with fieldstone. The way she had learned, without anybody ever calling it teaching, that small things done in time could keep trouble from growing teeth. That thought stayed with her. So did another. Everything they made me do might be the very thing that keeps me alive. It was a bitter realization, but it was useful. And usefulness, Lucy was learning, could be its own kind of mercy. On the fourth morning, she found proof that she was not alone in the woods. Not a person, just a sign of one. Near a crooked beech tree above the creek, where the ground turned soft with old leaves, she spotted boot prints, large ones, deep at the heel, not fresh but not washed away either. Lucy froze. Her first feeling was fear, not because she thought somebody might help her, but because she thought somebody might send her back. That afternoon, she stayed inside the alcove and made no fire. She barely moved. She listened to the water and watched the light shift and kept one hand on the little knife in her lap. No one came. But the next morning, when she climbed carefully to the ledge above the falls, she found a small cloth bundle tucked beneath a flat rock. Inside was a twist of salt, a bent fish hook, and a short, sharp pocket knife with a bone handle worn smooth from years of use. Lucy stared at it for a long time. There was no note, no name, no message saying this came with strings attached. Just three things a person needed, left by somebody who had looked at her circumstances and understood them exactly. Her throat tightened so fast it hurt. She looked into the trees, half expecting a voice, a face, a demand. Nothing. Only the woods, still, quiet, watching. That night, she held the little knife in both hands by the dim light of the evening sky and felt something shift inside her. Not safety, not yet, but the beginning of it. For the first time since she had been turned out in the rain, Lucy understood that surviving was not only about hiding from harm, it was also about recognizing grace when it came soft and deciding to live long enough to deserve it. By the time the first hard cold settled over the Tennessee hills, Lucy May's hiding place no longer looked like a place someone had fallen into by accident. It looked lived in. Not comfortable, not easy, but lived in. The low stone barrier near the front of the alcove had grown into a waist-high wall, fitted together with careful hands and stubborn patience. Branches woven through the gaps helped catch the mist before it rolled too far inside. Her bedding had changed too. What began as leaves and hemlock boughs had become a raised sleeping spot of flat stones, pine layers, and her blanket folded double against the chill. She had made a shelf from driftwood and stacked rock, a place for the tin cup, a place for the fish hook, a place for the little knife she still kept close, even in sleep. And near the back wall, where the stone stayed driest, she had built a small fire pit ringed with creek rock and lined with ash from earlier burns. Smoke did not gather the way she feared it might. It slipped upward through a narrow crack high in the rock and drifted out so thin that the mountains seemed to swallow it. By then, she knew who had left the bundle. His name was Eli Turner. He was older than old looked on some men, lean, weathered, and quiet in the way of people who had spent more years in woods than in town. He trapped some, hunted some, sold hides when he had to, and knew the mountains the way other folks knew family recipes or church hymns. The first time he stepped through the edge of the falls, Lucy had nearly grabbed the knife. But he lifted one empty hand and said plain and easy, "If I meant you harm, I wouldn't have brought flour." That was Eli. No speech, no pity, just a small sack set down on stone, and enough respect to wait for her to speak first. After that, he came every week or so. Never on the same day, never at the same hour, but often enough that Lucy stopped jumping at every sound near the rocks. He showed her how to split kindling fine so wet wood would still catch, how to hang strips of rabbit meat where the smoke could dry them slow, how to watch the clouds rolling low over the ridge and know whether the weather meant snow, freezing rain, or trouble. He did not ask what happened at the Carter place, not at first, and Lucy loved him a little for that. It was easier to trust a person who did not go digging in your wounds just because they saw you bleeding. One gray afternoon, as sleet rattled against the falling water outside, Eli crouched by the fire and studied the wall she had built. "You did good," he said. Lucy glanced over from where she was scraping a pot clean. "It's crooked. So are most things that hold." She smiled before she meant to. It was a small smile, quick, gone in a blink. But it startled her all the same. By December, she had learned the rhythm of the place. How the falls sounded heavier before a storm. How the stone held cold at the front and softness at the back. How the world beyond the water could look silver and brutal, while her little hidden room glowed gold from one careful fire. For the first time in her life, the shape of her days belonged to her. And then the storm came. Not a pretty snow. Not the kind that made postcards or church ladies talk about God's beauty. This one came with black clouds and a hard wind that snapped branches off oak trees and sent freezing rain sideways through the hollow. By sundown, the waterfall had thickened and darkened, fed by runoff from the ridge above. The mist turned sharper, meaner. Water began to creep across the outer floor of the alcove. Lucy saw it too late. At first, it was just a sheen over the stone, then a trickle, then a fast, dirty rush forcing its way through the gaps near the wall. Her bedding got wet first, then the corner where she kept her wood, then the flour sack, before she snatched it up and stumbled backward, heart pounding. She worked with both hands, shoving stones into place, dragging loose branches to brace the lower wall, slipping twice and skinning her palms on the limestone. The water was so cold it burned. By full dark, she was shaking, not from fear alone, from exhaustion, from cold, from the awful understanding that if the flood rose much higher, the place she had trusted could still take everything from her. Then she heard it, a voice half lost under the pounding water. "Lucy, Illy." He came through the curtain soaked to the bone, carrying a coil of rope over one shoulder and a lantern shielded in his coat. Together they fought the water in that dim, flickering light, hauling her food higher, clearing the runoff path, building a quick drainage channel with rock and mud and brute force. It took less than an hour. It felt like all night. When the surge finally weakened, Lucy dropped onto the stone floor, chest heaving, wet hair stuck to her cheeks. Eli stood there breathing hard, one hand braced against the wall. "You all right?" he asked. Lucy looked around at the soaked bedding, the scattered wood, the muddy floor, the little room she had worked so hard to build. Then she looked back at him, and for the first time, she answered like someone who had earned the truth. "No," she said, voice trembling, "but I will be." By morning, the storm had moved east. The falls still roared, the creek still ran high, but the worst had passed. What Lucy did not know yet, what neither of them knew, was that the flood had left signs below. Mud on the rocks, a washed-out trail, a glimpse through thinner water of a stone wall where no wall ought to be, and down in town before another week was out, people would begin to talk. Not about a missing foster girl anymore, but about the strange hidden room behind the waterfall and the child who had somehow made a life there. The talk reached town before it reached the Carter farm. That was how things worked in small Tennessee communities. A washed-out trail got noticed. A hunter mentioned a strange wall of stone behind a waterfall. A storekeeper recalled a skinny girl buying flour in silence before sunrise. A widow named Sadie Boone, who missed very little, put the pieces together before anybody else did. By the second week after the storm, folks were whispering about the girl in the mountain. Not with cruelty at first, with curiosity. Then the story made its way to Mrs. Carter. And suddenly, after months of silence, Lucy May mattered again. They came on a cold Sunday afternoon. Mrs. Carter in her wool coat, Mr. Carter behind her, hat in both hands, and a deacon from church, as if respectability itself had decided to make the climb. Lucy saw them from above the falls, where she had been gathering split branches and checking the little path Eli had helped her secure after the flood. For one long second, all the old fear came back. The porch, the rain, the bag at her feet. It rose in her chest so fast she could hardly breathe. Then she looked past it, looked at the stone wall she had built, the bedding she had dried and remade, the shelf with her cup, her flower, her knife, the small fire pit blackened from use, the place that had held her when no one else did. And something inside her steadied. Mrs. Carter spoke first. "Lucy May," she called over the water, sharp and breathless. "You can stop this foolishness now. We've come to take you home." Home. That word nearly broke her heart, because now she knew what it was supposed to mean. Mr. Carter would not meet her eyes at first. Then finally he did, and she saw it there. Not courage, not even love strong enough to undo what had happened. Just shame, late and thin and not nearly enough. The deacon stepped forward like a man prepared to be helpful. "This is no place for a young girl," he said. "You've made your point. Let these good people make things right." Lucy stood very still. Behind her, the falls thundered. In front of her, 3 people waited for her to become small again. She thought of every year she had tried to earn her keep, every careful silence, every swallowed hurt, every time she had mistaken usefulness for belonging. Then she spoke. Her voice shook on the first word, but only the first. "You didn't come for me when I was hungry," she said. "You didn't come when it got cold. You didn't come when I was alone. You came now, because people are talking." Mrs. Carter's face hardened. Mr. Carter flinched. And Lucy, for the first time in her life, did not apologize for telling the truth. "This place may look hard to you," she said, glancing back at the stone and fire and falling water, "but it never once asked me to prove I deserved to stay." Nobody answered that right away. Even the deacon fell quiet. The only sound was the water. Then Sadie Boone appeared on the trail below, carrying a basket on one arm like she had every right in the world to be there. She had heard enough town talk to know what was happening, and she had come not to rescue Lucy, but to stand where Lucy could see she was not alone. Eli came a few minutes later from the ridge above. He said nothing. He just stopped near the path and waited. That was all Lucy needed. Mrs. Carter tried once more, softer this time. "You'd throw away a proper roof for this?" Lucy looked around, at the clean stones, at the winter light through the water, at the place she had made with her own blistered hands. Then she answered in a voice calm enough to surprise even herself. "No," she said. "I'm keeping the first thing that was ever really mine." They left before sunset. Not in triumph, not in forgiveness, just in silence. And Lucy watched them go without running after them. By spring, the hidden place behind the waterfall was no longer just a hiding place. It was a life. Sadie helped Lucy trade eggs, sewing, and dried herbs in town. Eli helped her strengthen the upper path and roof the little wood store against rain. And little by little, the girl who had once been turned out with a bag and a blanket became someone folks spoke of with something new in their voices. Respect. Not because she had been pitied, not because she had been saved, but because she had endured. Years later, people would still tell the story of the foster girl who vanished into the mountain and built herself a home behind a waterfall. But the truest part of the story was simpler than that. Lucy May Carter had not just found shelter. She had found her own worth in the one place no one could take from her. And now I want to ask you something. What do you think matters more? The house someone gives you or the place you build with your own courage? If Lucy's story stayed with you, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what part touched your heart the most. And if you believe stories like this still matter, subscribe to the channel. There's always another fire to gather around and another story waiting in the dark.